Oh, Ian is here. Sorry, Manal, are you waiting for confirmation to start, or shall we start?
The video starting, perhaps? Okay, we'll go ahead and start. Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us from everywhere you are with the different time zones, and Happy New Year to all of you. On behalf of the Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park, it is my honor to welcome you today to this webinar on the future of hydrogen in the global energy transition. I am Dr. Manal Shahabi. I am founding director of Sheer Research and Advisory. We specialize in energy, economics, and resources research and consulting advisory. I am also visiting academic at the University of Oxford's St. Anthony's College and a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. I'm delighted to be here with you today with a fantastic set of panelists that we have. But before I go ahead and introduce them to you, we have a short video from the Sharjah Research, Technology and Innovation Park that they would like to play. So if we can go ahead and please have that in the background.
This video is brought to you by SRTI Park Studio, a whole new visual experience to promote your business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sharjah Research and Technology and Innovation Park presentation, your regional gateway for innovation and business growth. The Sharjah Research and Technology Park is a brainchild of the UAE leadership of enforcing the role of innovation and knowledge economy and developing the economy of this country and creating new opportunities for private sector, public sectors, and entrepreneurs. It's a reflection of the leadership strategy of innovation 2020-30 for the United Arab Emirates. We are delighted and lucky in Sharjah to have the ruler of Sharjah, His Highness Sheikh Dr. Sultan bin Mohammed Al-Qasimi, as the chairman of the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. His Highness' commitment to education is massive. He invests not only monetary resources in developing the infrastructure of Sharjah when it comes to innovation and education, but his dedication is immense to developing the whole ecosystem of education and knowledge economy in Sharjah. We at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park focus on four main objectives. The first objective is to develop an innovation ecosystem, not only based on the infrastructure of building and the street, but also the mindset of people. We also aim at developing next generation scientists, entrepreneurs, and leaders that can support our drive toward innovation. Our third objective is to focus on catalyzing knowledge economy, investing in technology and science and entrepreneurs so that we can have an impact and create enterprises that support the economy of the country and the economy of Sharjah and make it more competitive. And last, our fourth objective is really to invest in the future. We at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park, we identify companies and we vet them and we invest in these companies and we scale them up. Our objective is to create enterprises that will create economic, sustainable business. We at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park focus on 6 main subjects. The first one is water technology. The second one, production design and architecture. A third one is mobility, logistics, and smart cities. Fourth one is healthcare and digitization. And fifth one is renewable energy. And last but not least, environmental technology and circular economy. These are the 6 areas we focus on. And these are the 6 areas that we believe our colleges, our private sector have a competitive edge to grow and develop. We believe in triple helix. We work with government, private sector, academia, and non-for-profit organization to develop our ecosystem of innovation. We have launched research activities with universities, and we're trying to commercialize this research. We also engage with government and implementing best practices when it comes to artificial intelligence, blockchains. We launch sandbox with ministries, and we work with businesses as well in developing and commercializing technologies that will make them more sustained, and more competitive going forward. We pride ourselves at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park to be able to attract some of the leading technologies into our park, whether we are talking about 3D construction or additive manufacturing or agriculture technologies or photovoltaic R&D centers or transport and mobility technologies or mixed realities. We pride ourselves to be part of a 47,000 students ecosystem at 22 universities and education institutions and more than 2,000 PhD holders, all in the same place within the vicinity of the technology park. Since its inception, the Sharjah Research and Technology Park managed to attract global players, regional players, and local players. We proud ourselves to work with international companies like GE, like Intel and Nokia, for example. We work with GE on additive manufacturing. We work with Intel on solution related to educations and reskilling. And we work with Nokia, for example, on IoT labs and other things. We also have regional companies leading in additive manufacturing like Amensa. We have also mobile fueling companies like Kafu, and also we have companies in health like Nipta. We also have local startups that are thriving and really defining the way forward. Since an inception at SRTIP, we believed to have a global vision and regional mission. We believe in partnership, sustainable partnership. That's why we work with countries, with academic institutions, with science institutions, and with UN-led organizations as well. The objective is to develop sustainable partnership and a win-win situation for everyone. We developed the Sharjah Research and Technology Park based on best practices. And its start, we managed to benchmark Sharjah against 9 other cities around the world, from Boston to Marseille to Shenzhen to Bangalore to Hyderabad to Philadelphia. We looked at 6 main innovation criteria, like market and investment, inter-firm activity, knowledge and R&D, human skills, infrastructure. And we looked at these things and we benchmarked with other nations around us to see where Sharjah is vis-a-vis this nation and learn from these activities as we go on. Here are some examples of the bright technologies that we are developing here in Sharjah. We pride ourselves to have the largest or one of the largest transport and logistics innovation center in the world. We in Sharjah developing next generation technologies that will be promoted in this region and will become an integral part of the mobility solution in the Middle East. We also pride ourselves to have significant investment and technology development in hydroponics and aquaponics and agriculture technologies. We believe that the Middle East food security insists that we develop these type of technologies, and we work hand in hand with the private sectors, with entrepreneurs, and with academias to develop these technologies here. Third, we also developing a photovoltaic R&D center. Our main is to promote renewable diversity and bring new source of sustainable diversity to the energy mix when it comes here in the park. We pride ourselves to launch Energy Innovation Hub, a regional platform to engage and attract innovations into this region and link them to the industries of energy within the region. We also pride ourselves at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park to host one of the largest makerspace in the UAE, the Sharjah Open Innovation Lab. This lab dedicated to entrepreneurs, to faculties, to companies to come and co-create and co-innovate the future of technologies at the park. We develop and promote this soil lab by engaging with different players, whether you are an investor or a company or academia. They all come and co-create and create businesses and enterprise out of this lab, which features cutting-edge technologies in textile technologies, electronics, metal, 3D technologies, and others. For SRTIP, collaboration with academia is an integral part of our work. We work with universities in the UAE and around the world. For example, the American University of Sharjah is one of our key partners, and we work with them on three main areas. One around IP and commercialization, entrepreneurship and development of science, employment and internship, and also lab exchange. We believe to have an innovation, we have to develop human capital and develop a strong link to academia and academic institutions. Here, I would like to share with you some other examples of the innovation we have here. We've managed at SRTIP in collaboration with academia and industry to create a fantastic footprint, a regional lab for construction of 3D materials. So we have today printed many houses using 3D technologies and using collaboration with education as well. Another example of what we do is we develop IP, intellectual property, and commercialization of the IP. And the topic, for example, here is conductive concrete. Another example of R&D is we are developing an exoskeleton technology that can apply for healthcare sector and also apply for industry within construction as well. And we do this in collaboration with academia and in collaboration with the private sector as well. The Sharjah Research and Technology Park also thrives on developing an ecosystem. I have spoken about the Middle East Energy Innovation Hub. This is a platform to develop new innovation within the energy sector. To be able to conduct our work at SRTIP, we have developed a comprehensive ecosystem that includes events and themes like the Women in Technology, promoting circular economy, and launching various accelerators. Our flagship accelerator is the Sharjah Advanced Industry Accelerator. We pride ourselves to be a home for the Middle East North Africa Innovation Technology Transfer Summit. We would like to position Sharjah as a platform for technology innovation and technology transfer in the whole Middle East. And we work with scientists, with science institutions, academia, private sector to be able to do this. In addition to that, we run a series of events at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. These comprise webinars, exhibition, conferences that allow businesses and partners and tenants of SRTIP to engage and grow and develop their businesses and build up strong network with investors, businesses, academia, and government. We also launched the Sharjah Angel Investor. The main aim of this angel investor is to create funds and make funds available for startups to come and grow out of Sharjah. We also host many delegations, international delegations, throughout the year at the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. We host a lot of webinars, and we aim to do more of these webinars to cement relationship with countries, with industries, and with different players. Sharjah Research and Technology Park also have fantastic facilities for exhibition. We host many exhibitions and conferences at the park, and we aim to continue doing that going forward. This is a summary of the Sharjah Research and Technology Park. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We look forward to working with you. We will look forward to partner with you and grow with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. And I encourage everyone we've got a few questions about the park. For anyone who's interested, check the link that was provided. Without further ado, I'd like to take the remaining time of our webinar today. First, introduce our wonderful panelists, which I'll introduce in alphabetical order. We first have Mr. Aman Amanpour. Aman is an independent petrochemical and energy consultant at Amanpour Consultants, which he's joined after retiring from an extensive career at Shell and in the energy industry. His work covers chemicals, oil and gas, and most recently clean energy and clean hydrogen, and has extensive advisory experience on new investments and new assets and joint ventures. Next, we have Mr. Robin Mills, who is CEO of Qamar Energy based in the UAE and has expertise in energy strategy, especially in the Middle East. He's author of various writings on strategic future of energy, particularly The Myth of the Oil Crisis and Capturing Carbon. He's also non-resident fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, SIPA, and senior fellow at the Iraq Energy Institute. Next, we have Mr. Muthanna Shirzad. Muthanna is the founder and CEO of Proteum Technology, a UK and UAE startup companies focusing on future sustainable green energy. He's an aerospace engineering by training and also an entrepreneur in the hydrogen space. Proteum Technology is currently developing the world's first net zero emission biohydrogen powertrain concept to be used in aviation and transportation. Also, he's a PhD candidate at Cranfield University in the UK. Last but not least, we also have early morning joining us from the US, Mr. Eric Strayer, who is the Vice President of International Sales for Fuel Cells Energy, which is a provider of decarbonized power and hydrogen production solutions. And Eric has worked in the hydrogen space and fuel cell industry for over 18 years, and had different roles in technology, product development, global business development, with various actors like the United Technology Fuel Cell Division, Ultra-G, and Fuel Cell Energy. With that background, I would like to jump into the topic of today's webinar, which is hydrogen. Just to kind of help a bit set the stage for those of you who might not be familiar with hydrogen and its role in the energy field. Of course, hydrogen is the most abundant element on Earth. And its application in energy sector specifically are not new. They date back to the 1960s or so. But recently, we have seen a rising importance of hydrogen as a decarbonization or an energy transition path that's becoming more increasingly important in a decarbonizing world. There has been rising global interest in climate and sustainable policy, and we've seen even after COP26 last year in Glasgow, even rising global commitments to reduce emissions and mitigate climate change. And in this context, hydrogen has become an important potential solution to achieve decarbonization, energy security, but also climate change mitigation, because when it is burned, it does not produce carbon as a product. And because of that, as well as the versatility and the various applications and advantages for hydrogen, we're seeing increasing interest in hydrogen investments, as well as hydrogen projects. The Hydrogen Council estimates that around 1/5, or about 18 to 20% of global final energy demand will be met by clean hydrogen in 2050. And this would be pretty much what is required to achieve 1/4 of the required CO2 abatements by 2050. So this is kind of the potential role in the future. But I'd like to maybe from here kind of help us a bit, maybe I can call on Eric to help us set the stage a little bit. Why, if you can just tell us a little bit more, why does hydrogen play a potentially important role in the energy transition? And currently, where are we vis-a-vis this 2050 vision that I've just briefly outlined?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Manal, and it's a pleasure to be here. And to answer the question, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. It's all about decarbonization and hydrogen, whether it's burned in a combustion process or used in electrochemical conversion in a fuel cell. Hydrogen is that really that fuel of the future that can bring us to decarbonization and serve as a replacement for some of the backbone fuels that we rely on today, whether it's natural gas and pipeline or transportation, the various transportation fuels that are being studied. Hydrogen offers that really truly clean option for the future that can be transported and can really be serve as a replacement for most infrastructure applications.
Thanks for that. And where are we today? What's the status for hydrogen in the energy world today, or for clean hydrogen? Because you've just outlined.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if you look at, there's been sort of an accelerating movement over the last couple of years. I'd say even in the throes of the pandemic. If you look at reports early last year, 14 countries had national hydrogen strategies published. 11 more were in drafting. I think most of those have been published since, including the United States, who on the, that was the predecessor to having the infrastructure bill, which is now in place to put hydrogen hubs throughout the US. And, there are billions of US dollars directed towards hydrogen hubs, carbon capture, and other types of decarbonization. We're seeing, I think if you look at the leading markets, from a policy perspective, the US is certainly, turning a corner, but Europe has been working on, policy implementation and pilot projects over the last few years. I'd say that region is probably leading the pack. South Korea, Japan are also looking to transition their economies to hydrogen as the new backbone fuel, with, of course, probably much of that supply coming, as an import like they do with LNG today.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also, we've seen a rise even in hydrogen projects and strategies among oil and gas exporters as well. I mean, even in the region, we've seen Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Oman have all also embarked on projects as well, and announced policies in the case of Saudi Arabia. But even with all of these advancements, hydrogen that is clean is basically, or what I mean by clean is produced from oil, or not produced from, at the moment, 95% of hydrogen globally is produced from oil and gas or coal, without any capturing of the carbon that's being emitted in the process. And that is, the dirty hydrogen, so to speak. And then we can produce hydrogen from natural gas and hydrocarbons while capturing the carbon content in the blue, or using renewable energy to produce hydrogen in what is called green hydrogen. But still, blue and green hydrogen, which are clean hydrogen, are still a very short or small percentage of the global hydrogen that's produced and that's needed to achieve that decarbonized vision that we've mentioned. And from this, I'd like to maybe move on to Muthanna, to maybe if Muthanna could outline a bit some of the challenges that we have facing particularly clean hydrogen, blue and green, in reaching this vision.
Hi, Manal. Thank you very much. Indeed, well, as you highlighted earlier, and your colleague, that there is a big challenge, which is the environmental crisis that we speak now. And we need to reduce the carbon emissions into the atmosphere. I like it, someone who has said earlier, he put the atmosphere as a public sewer. And this is exactly what's happening nowadays. We don't account for the CO2 that we emit into the atmosphere, and this is the major problem for the global warming. So alternatively, what we humans are looking into, trying to produce an alternative source to the fossil fuel, and this is hydrogen. Will hydrogen solve the problem? I'm sorry to say that, but it is not a silver bullet. Hydrogen is a very good candidate for certain projects, and it's a very good candidate for as a future fuel. But at this stage here, there are a lot of challenges, and the science community are working relentlessly trying to resolve all these technical issues. We do have the technology, but it is not in a perfect form. Major challenges, it is the biggest hurdle is that we need to produce clean hydrogen. Blue hydrogen, even though you said that the carbon capturing technology, it does exist, but it only exists in 2 places in the world, one in Canada, one in America. So, and they work on a very small scale. And the cost apparently of capturing the CO2 adds another $1 into every kilo of hydrogen that we produce. So there is a question mark about whether the blue hydrogen is going to be the future. However, we need the blue hydrogen as a transition for the green hydrogen. And we have no escape from this reality, but we have to deal with it, and we have to find a very efficient way to capture that CO2 to produce that hydrogen. Green hydrogen, on the other hand, relies on a green infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, because electrolysis needs electricity, and that electricity source needs to come from from renewable resources. So the whole green hydrogen economy is actually based on a green electricity. And that is a mammoth, gigantic task in order to achieve, to get rid of the fossil fuel electricity, the electricity generated from fossil fuel, and then direct that electricity to produce hydrogen. These are just the production, but we also have the storage challenges, and we also have the utilization challenges, which we are also working on addressing them.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's interesting they also said blue hydrogen is looked at as potentially a transition for the future. And of course, there's 2 opposing views at some point that whether blue hydrogen should really be the transition, or should you just jump into green because blue is still has a big carbon content, but at the same time, blue hydrogen uses the existing infrastructure of hydrocarbons, and it's definitely, it seems also a clear starting point for many of the hydrocarbon companies or even petrostates as well. Perhaps I could go to Robin for a little bit, kind of jumping on this point, because you're based in the Middle East. We have seen that hydrocarbon exporters trying, to hold on to their space, the leading space in the energy world in a decarbonizing world. As I mentioned earlier, there have been hydrogen projects announced in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. And also subsequently, we've seen Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE also announce or can make pledges to net zero emissions. And I was wondering if you could maybe outline what the opportunity then basically here for petrostates, for leading hydrocarbon exporters in the world. What's the opportunity for them in hydrogen? What does this really mean for the global energy transition in general?
Sure, thank you, Manal. Thanks, everyone. So the oil exporting countries face, a very interesting challenge over the next 30 odd years up to 2050. Some of them have made net zero carbon commitments, as we know, UAE by 2050, Saudi Arabia and Bahrain by 2060. So they're facing potentially a long-term decline in global oil markets, maybe in gas later on, but certainly in oil. And they're looking, therefore, for what can they do to decarbonize their domestic economies, and also what can they do to create new export industries that build on their competitive strengths and that are going to, first of all, supplement and eventually possibly replace their current oil and gas exports. And I think up to 2019, hydrogen didn't really figure. In 2020, probably late 2020, hydrogen suddenly, very suddenly came into world attention, not just in the Middle East, but in Europe and elsewhere, as a major potential fuel. I think there was a realization that firstly, renewables are great, advancing really quickly, but they're not enough. There's numerous areas of applications which renewables will not serve or will not serve very well. Heavy industry, for example, long distance transport. Those are a couple of major examples. And there was also a recognition, I think, that renewables had advanced enormously quickly through this process of scaling up and standardization and manufacturing type approaches, and just basically by building scale. And that the realization that it might be possible to do the same for hydrogen, at least for so-called green hydrogen from electrolysis. So put those two things together, and hydrogen suddenly became viable, and people could see a pathway to say by 2030, let's say, that this could be becoming a significant part of the global energy system. And you really talk there about hydrogen importers, you talk about Europe, and you talk about East Asia, particularly South Korea and Japan, as the main kind of uses of, likely importers and users of hydrogen initially. So I think the Gulf countries have seen those as potential markets, and have seen this as a replacement or a supplement for their oil and gas exports. And we've seen Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Oman in particular jumping into this and announcing some very large projects. However, we've got to be kind of realistic, I think, about the scale of these. So the UAE has announced 3 large hydrogen projects, 2 green and 1 blue, that they'll actually produce ammonia ultimately. So ammonia obviously can be used as a fertilizer. It can be used as a fuel for certain applications. And I think ammonia is probably, rather than pure hydrogen, will probably be the main output product of most of these projects initially. So these projects, these ammonia projects, if you look at what they would earn at current ammonia prices, and current ammonia prices are rather high by historical standards, they would earn about $1.7 billion per year. So that's pretty good. However, if you think that the UAE earns about $80 billion annually in oil, or just oil exports alone, and then plus some gas, you can see that these hydrogen projects are a useful supplement to oil exports, but they are not in any way a replacement for it, not at current scale, and it'll probably be a long time before they are really scaling up to be in any way a significant replacement. The other side, I think, of this, which is probably more promising, is the production of low carbon materials. And again, if you think about Europe in particular, from using hydrogen, you could produce, for example, low carbon ammonia, fertilizers, petrochemicals, steel, materials like this, which are currently made in a very high carbon way. And I think that's probably the bigger opportunity for the Gulf countries, is to become centers of energy intensive but low carbon manufacturing of these kind of materials and exporting those to the rest of the world. That is one way around the problems of the high transport costs and the technical challenges of moving hydrogen around. So we're seeing these trends coming together in the strategies of the Gulf countries.
Thank you. That's very interesting, because also in a way you're basically echoing a point that Musanna said about the fact that hydrogen is going to be a really important part of the solution, but not the solution. And definitely from a fiscal perspective, as you've outlined for Gulf economies, it's just going to be by itself not sufficient going forward. And but we also see these big projects and big investments. And perhaps I could move from this as a point to Aman, because Aman, you've worked with lots of clients, and you've worked on clients in the energy sector, and you've worked particularly on investments as well. Maybe what do you think, where are we going between now and 2030? So, I mean, I think between now and 2030 will probably determine whether the industry and hydrogen space particularly, we can actually achieve these 2050 lofty goals that have been outlined. What do you think we're going and we're heading, particularly in whether we're having the necessary investments in this field vis-a-vis investments in hydrocarbons?
Yes, thank you very much, Manal, for the kind introduction and the invitation from CERTIP. Yes, indeed, we have two key milestones. One is obviously 2050 or 2060, where 90 plus countries have already committed themselves to net zero target. And for achieving those targets, there is indeed this 2030 as a key milestone for many aspects, many tools and vehicles of achieving the 2050 target, including for green or clean hydrogen. Actually, there are lots of projections targeting at this date, 2030, and it is considered that if some of the intermediate targets are achieved regarding production and implementation and application of clean hydrogen by 2030, then we are standing a good chance to achieve the goals of 2050 and let clean hydrogen play its fair role of, let's say, 20% decarbonization overall, its share in the total other ways and means of decarbonization. So from whatever I am observing is that there are some regions and countries which are pioneering the achievement of the targets for 2030. So Europe, for example, is, and my country, Germany, they were actually quickest in the last couple of years to actually formulate country and continent strategies for clean hydrogen. And not only that, there has been a plethora of, let's say, other supporting legislation, papers, associations, activities to achieve, to implement actually whatever has been written in the, let's say, country strategy or EU strategy. From whatever is being credibly projected, I would expect that by 2030, we should realistically achieve a quantity of 75 million tons, 70 to 80 million tons of clean hydrogen consisting of blue and green. Hopefully chiefly green, but you cannot ignore blue either, because one of the important enablers is to create demand. And blue, that means removal of carbon dioxide from steam reforming and creating in that way hydrogen, is going to be a transitory, let's say, phase, but hopefully the lion's share of the hydrogen by 2030, the 75, let's say, to 80 million tons of clean hydrogen would be green. Let's compare it. What is this quantity? Currently, we have a production of almost the same amount of hydrogen, but chiefly gray. That means non-clean, non-blue, and not non-green. So it's a huge task. I mean, what is being targeted at is to create the same quantity of hydrogen, but clean. That means 1/3 of the current, let's say, gray hydrogen is being targeted by then to be replaced by clean, i.e. green and blue, and the rest of it should really come out of green and blue themselves. So the projected overall, I mean, this is not an exact science, I mean, plus minus lots of error, but people are talking about investments of up to $700 billion up to 2030 for achieving these kind of targets. From what I mean, there are lots of changes almost by the day, but the latest, let's say, statistics which I've been looking at is telling us that there are already either, let's say, projects which have been FID'd, final investment decision has been made, or those which are in the pipeline and they are close to be approved in the next couple of years, 22, 23. We are talking about the total investment volume of $160 billion to be on stream on before or by 2030. So if that's the case, we are still missing a gap of, let's say, $500+ billion, $550 billion of investment, which need to take place, or let's say put in the pipeline, in the opportunity and project pipeline, to achieve those kind of targets. But personally, I am very much optimistic that this will happen because the amount of countries and companies and institutions which have been scrambling to, let's say, define the targets and start to deliver on that is really amazing. I mean, talking about Europe, Europe has put a target of 40 gigawatt of green hydrogen, green hydrogen to be produced in the continent itself, and another 40 billion equivalent gigawatt of green hydrogen to be imported. This is by 2030, the milestone which you mentioned. But in the next 3 to 4 years, by 2024, 2025, there is a target of utilizing 6 gigawatts of green energy to produce almost 1 million ton of green hydrogen. So, and from whatever I am seeing, the projects which are in the pipeline, I think this shorter term objective is realistic, 6 gigawatt of equivalent. We can talk about Australia. They have, in Australia, there is a project which is amazing, which is mind-boggling. They're targeting at building 36 gigawatt of green electricity, utilizing $35 to $40 billion, that project. China is amazing, moving. Japan and Korea, focusing on ammonia, importing from the Gulf states, as Robin mentioned. So I can just go on and on and on, but I stop here and wait for the next round or the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And indeed, just also talking about where you are in Germany, there's, I think, acknowledgement that the green hydrogen that's required is also not available or cannot be produced within the European, continent. And that's why there's more interest in having some sort of, partnerships with other potential hydrogen producers, whether in the Gulf, like Robin had mentioned, or even North Africa, and et cetera. But it's interesting that you're obviously very you're optimistic, even though there's this large gap of 550 billion worth of investments that you've said, and all of you collectively have identified various challenges that I think are still missing, whether it's investments in required infrastructure and transportation. There's obviously the policy spectrum, which Eric has mentioned, has kind of accelerated significantly. There's the point about creating demand that is also still important. But also there's another point I think that's potentially has been a bit missing from this discussion, is the fact that the price of clean hydrogen. So there's, at the moment, blue and green hydrogen are just not competitive with fossil fuels. This is just a reality, right? And then also with, it seems like there's some consensus, or maybe the majority of you kind of say, yes, blue hydrogen will still be important, and there's these projects at least as a transition, but blue hydrogen depends on carbon capture and utilization technology, which is also still not fully viable. And I was maybe opening the questions now to the floor to everyone. What is then needed to accelerate these investments in in hydrogen, and to actually, whether it's fill this gap or create the demand and help us get, is it policy, is it technology, is it something else to help us get to where we need by 2030 to then be where we need by 2050?
Sorry, I'm going to hijack the conversation here. Sorry. I'm sure Eric, is that the question specifically for Eric or for all of us? Sorry, Manal.
I think it's for all of you, actually, because I think all of you have mentioned different parts of it.
All right, let me highlight a couple of facts about hydrogen. So at the moment, back in the days, millions of years ago, where nature has actually produced a very energy dense fluid for us, which oil, and we've been extracting that oil, and energy has put, the environment has put an energy into it, pressure and heat over millions of years, and formed it for us. So the fuel was ready for us, and all we had to do was just extract it and purify it and use it in a way that we use it nowadays. However, hydrogen is a different breed here. Hydrogen is not ready-made fuel. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It's almost 80% of the universe. However, it is not found to be in its molecular form. We have to extract it. It's always bound with something else. Either if it's bound with an oxygen, then it forms water. If it bonds with carbon, then it forms methane gas. And if it forms with nitrogen, then it forms the ammonia. So it's always, we have to extract it from some form of a media. And the easiest way where scientists have found that it is, we can extract it from water with electricity. But thermodynamically, we are actually reversing. We're going backwards, where we're adding more energy to extract less energy. So we put about, well, theoretically, is about 40 kilowatts per hour to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen. But we, because the efficiency losses, we put about 50 to 55 kilowatts of hour of energy to produce 1 kilo of hydrogen. But when we use that hydrogen, we only produce 33 kilowatts of hour. So there is always a loss here. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge because the cost of the energy that we're going to put into producing the hydrogen is not going to be the same that we're going to be extracting. Unlike the hydrogen, which is coming from the fossil fuel, from the methane, in the steam reform process, the fuel is very cheap for us. The gas is very cheap. All we need to do is just add energy and steam, and we extract it. But capturing the carbon itself in that process, that is going to add more cost into the hydrogen. Unfortunately, the fossil fuel subsidies, if it continues, and if we don't tax carbon, the fossil fuel will always be the bottleneck for the hydrogen, because fossil fuel always going to be cheaper than hydrogen from a science point of view. We think we have to put a lot of energy to make that hydrogen, and by doing so, we're adding more cost into the process. Sorry, Eric, maybe he can add more into that.
Yeah, Muthana, I like the way you've elegantly described really the process and some of the challenges. And in our view, I think we see certainly a path in a play for green hydrogen as the end goal. But we also, if you look at building on your point, two of the best natural carriers of hydrogen are water and hydrocarbons. They're dense. Natural existing carriers of hydrogen. So, we certainly, when you look at green hydrogen, we've been working on really the challenge is making green hydrogen. There is the expense of the upfront electricity. So the efficiency at which you can convert that upfront electricity to hydrogen as a product, that's really where we've focused our efforts over the last 20 years. And we've been introducing a solid oxide electrolyzer, which generates hydrogen from renewable electricity at 92% efficiency. If we're able to make use of a thermal input, we can achieve actually 100%. So I think that's an important lever in the green hydrogen play. For blue hydrogen, we've also been working on and developed technology to generate blue hydrogen with our fuel cell, our molten carbonate fuel cell platform, which generates hydrogen from natural gas with a carbon capture technology built in as well. And so, I think natural gas is like I said, a great natural carrier of hydrogen and will play a strong role in this long transition to to really achieve net zero over the long term. That's been our view.
Anyone else on maybe some of the other important, I guess, Aman, please.
Yeah, I mean, in
How
terms of
to make
cost,
it, the vision happen.
Sure. In terms of cost and competitiveness, I would mention two things. First of all, there is a magic number, which is $2 per kilogram of produced hydrogen. So if people are broadly agreeing that if that threshold is achieved and gone below, then we are talking about really huge exponential growth in terms of cost competitiveness. In terms of achieving this, I think there are two elements which are vital for the cost of production, all-in cost production of hydrogen. One is, of course, the cost of the input upstream renewable energy, let's say solar or wind. The other one is the economics and scale of electrolyzers. I'm talking about clean hydrogen now. Now, I mean, in Dubai, for example, in the latest two phases of this Mohammed bin Rashid solar park, we're talking about the delivered cost of electricity from that park to DIWA, which is the water and electricity authority, of 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour right now. And this is the absolute minimum of any energy produced, not only clean energy, but no other way of producing or generating electricity, be it gas or coal or nuclear, could beat that. So this one element is becoming very, very much available. The second one, which is the cost curve of the electrolyzers, this is also moving, not as fast as the first element, which I mentioned, but I've seen projections which are telling us that, and also the projects which are in the pipeline, which I'm aware of and partially involved in, that they are targeting at achieving, these projects are going in a staircase. This is also one of the reasons why the projects are not going full blown with the final capacity. They are going in steps, and the staircase is the name of the game. So they're hoping and working towards achieving the cost of electrolyzers, which are going to be anywhere between, let's say, $300 to $150 per kilowatt capacity of that electrolyzer. So if the latter part of the range, which I mentioned, 200, 150, is achieved as and when, together with the cost of electricity, which I quoted, is going to give us, let's say, a unit cost of $2 per kilogram of hydrogen or below. And this is, for me, as far as I can see through, would be achievable indeed in this decade, probably before the end of this decade. And that is one of the reasons which I said I'm all in all optimistic.
Sorry, Aman, I do agree with you that, solar panels, they do tend to be the cheapest source of power that we can use for electrolyzers. However, the challenge doesn't end there. The challenges of the hydrogen economy does not end there. Hydrogen, just to give a perspective to our viewers here, hydrogen is a very light element, and extremely light. Is the first element in the periodic table on the and it's the smallest element molecule we can ever have in the universe. Now, just to make you imagine how light it is, if we have 1 cubic meter of a box just 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, and we fill that with water, we will end up with almost 1,000 kilo of water. Now, if you fill that with hydrogen at 1 atmospheric pressure, we will end up with only 80 grams of hydrogen, only 80 grams of hydrogen. If we pressurize that to 350 bars, we will end up with about 24 kilos. And if you pressurize it at 700 bars, then we will end up with 41 kilos. And if we liquefy it at minus 253 degrees, we will end up at 70 kilos. As you can see, that the hydrogen is not just producing it, but then storing it, pressurizing it, and distributing it. That all adds up to the cost. And the infrastructure at the moment, it does not exist in order to make it very viable and economically viable.
So
And
if I
that's
can-
where the government's interference, it's very important here in order to support those infrastructures, in order to make it very viable. All right, go ahead, Maki.
No, just kind of going out of all of you are providing very beautiful technical details, but I just want to take it back to maybe the 6,000 foot level and just basically, so it's very clear then the transportation challenge is definitely still a problem. The storage challenge, and obviously hydrogen is very flammable as well. So that's also going to be a challenge. And there's agreement that we need more infrastructure and potentially taxes and prices need to change as well as the technology importance. What about, you've mentioned between the three of you a little bit maybe on the role of government, and obviously if we have this, especially with the increasing I guess governmental commitment in decarbonization globally, we've seen that very special, particularly in the US, for example, as Eric highlighted at the beginning. What's the role then? Maybe is what's missing then to achieve this required infrastructure, competitiveness, and technology advancement? Is what's missing the role of government? And maybe I'll call on Robin to start this next question before we maybe have another round of one question, and then unfortunately our time will be up. But Robin, would you mind letting us know what you think on that topic?
Yeah, look, I think at the moment what we have is a lot of production projects being announced around the world. You know, we've talked about the Middle East, we've talked about Australia. You know, we have projects in Chile, we have projects in Northwest Europe using wind power, plenty of hydrogen production projects. What we're not yet seeing enough of is demand and firm commitments from big buyers, big credible buyers who can stand behind purchase commitments. There have been some, you know, but there needs to be a lot more, and that'll be Europe. It'll be European utilities and industries. It'll be Japanese, big Japanese buyers, South Koreans. You know, those will be the anchors for the early projects. And we have seen some of these commitments signed, but you know, we'll need more. And this is a bit like the early days of the liquefied natural gas industry back in the 60s, when the Japanese government and Japanese state-backed interests were very important in signing long-term purchase commitments that enabled that industry to get up and running. So that's kind of similar here. That's really what we need. But obviously those companies to be buying lots of hydrogen, they need to have an economic incentive too. So, you know, they need to be industries like utilities, for example, that see hydrogen as a necessary replacement for gas, for gas-fired generation. They see that as a complement to their renewable energy sector in terms of balancing supply and demand effectively over long periods. There need to be industries like steel makers who are trying to prevent or replace the use of coal and gas for steel making with hydrogen. And we are seeing some industries making commitments like that. European policy will drive this, obviously the decarbonisation agenda in Europe will push that very much. Japan also kind of has a bit of a different approach from Europe, but again, decarbonisation and the import of say substituting the import of fossil fuels, which Japan is very comfortable with the import of non-fossil and non-carbon fuels. And then there are areas like long distance shipping and aviation, again, which have their own decarbonisation plans. They may well be using, probably not hydrogen directly, but synthetic fuels. So shipping could be using ammonia, aviation could be using synthetic kerosene, for example. So these industries also need to decarbonise. So we'll need to see some big purchase commitments from companies like that, and then that'll give the confidence for more of these very large hydrogen production projects to go into action.
So it all comes down to economics, really, obviously, from both to create demand as well, and to kind of, and so even in the case of Japan, it's been known that Japan will not import green hydrogen unless the price is also competitive with fossil fuels or blue ammonia, for example, or blue hydrogen, I should say. So then is the way then carbon taxes, is that the lever to make it more economic, I guess? Anyone?
Well, I can just jump in on that. Yeah. So, I mean, carbon taxes, we've seen the carbon price in Europe rising enormously over the past year, and it's getting close to $100 per ton of CO2, or 80 euros per ton.
90 or so. Yeah.
Yeah, 90 now. Okay. So at that level, you know, that's equivalent to, you know, roughly $5 per million British thermal units of natural gas. That is a major contribution to bridging the difference between low carbon hydrogen and natural gas, or between, let's say, low carbon and high carbon hydrogen. It's not all the way, but it is a big contribution. And then you add on that some policy differences, yes, then you're starting to get to the point that it'll become economically very sensible for companies to switch over to hydrogen.
Maybe you have 30 seconds each for just commenting on this question before we wrap up. Please, whoever, Aman, I think you wanted to have a saying, and then Eric after that, please.
I just wanted to reiterate the point which Robin made, and you also mentioned, absolutely, without government intervention in terms of carbon pricing, and not only carbon pricing, but in terms of mandates, the overall economics won't fly. Muthana is right, and economics of production is one thing, but across the whole value chain, lots of other things must happen. And the government has a big role to play, both in terms of creating the carbon market where that market is not created. There are some markets which are already there for carbon trading, and then putting mandates in terms of supporting the clean hydrogen. And both of these things, for example, is happening within the European strategy and their implementation, downstream documentations and legislations which are emerging right now. Yes.
Eric?
Yeah, I think we started this discussion. One of the panelists described the atmosphere as the largest public sewer on the planet. And with the goal of cleaning up, that's really, to build on that point, I think is the role of government is to get, our arms around really society to move in a different direction and put the right policies in place that enable that shift. The technology is there. There's pilot projects around the world generating hydrogen of multiple colors. The storage issues are being sorted out. The ability to ship hydrogen over long distances is not too far different from LNG, in terms of adding energy to compress or liquefy. And so these things are all sorted out. The biggest challenge kind of to the widespread use of hydrogen is just bringing the cost down. And that requires further investment to really get the scale up so that we can get these economies of scale so that all these new technologies and processes can be done at a price that's competitive with the current large volume of other fuels that are created and distributed.
Thank you very much for that. This has been a very interesting conversation, and unfortunately we've reached our time limit. Even though it feels like we've only scratched the surface, there's other topics that we could explore even further, particularly where the how hydrogen would fit in different industries, whether it's in the petrochemicals or in cooling and heating, or even in transportation, where we've seen a lot of, a train that runs on hydrogen being developed, and there's other interests in other areas. But unfortunately, we are out of time. But I would like to personally thank each of the participants here for this, the panelists, for a wonderful and interesting discussion. And thank you all for joining us today. This webinar will be shared for the recording subsequently, which you will be able to download, and we'll share the link, I think, among all of us. And in that, I would like to thank you again very much for your participation. Wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.